Unauthorized use may result in legal liability. The sea was merciless. The waves that had gently rocked the trawler in the morning had turned into raging walls of water by evening. But I didn't care. I had spent nearly 3 months at sea, and the only thing I wanted was to go home. I returned earlier than planned. The catch was good. The captain decided we could head to port, and so here I was in dry land, inhaling the heavy air of my hometown. My suitcase, filled with damp clothes, was thrown into the trunk, and I was driving home to my wife and daughter. The road took less time than I had expected. I didn't even call Maggie, let it be a surprise. When I opened the door, I heard noises coming from the bedroom. At first, I thought she was watching TV, but as I took another step forward, everything became clear. She wasn't alone. The very young, cocky bastard with a smug grin. I had caught them off guard, but he didn't look particularly concerned. On the contrary, he glanced at me as if I was the one who didn't belong here. "Who the hell are you?" he asked arrogantly, buttoning up his shirt. "I'm the husband. The owner of this house." My voice was ice cold. Maggie jumped out of bed, wrapping herself in a blanket. Her eyes widened in horror. "Michael, you're early." Clearly. Otherwise, I'd have stayed an idiot for another year. The lover decided he could play the hero. "Listen, fisherman, let's not make a scene. You're a grown man, just walk away and let us handle this like adults." I don't remember how my hand clenched into a fist, but the next thing I saw was his face slamming into the wall. He collapsed, shaking his head, trying to get up. I let him, only so I could send him back down. "Michael, stop," Maggie screamed. I grabbed him by the collar, lifted him up, and buried my fist into his jaw. A dull crunch. Blood on his lips. "What? You thought I was just some sailor who'd never come back?" I growled. "Or did you just assume I wouldn't give a damn?" "Why, you crazy fuck," he groaned. Another punch. This time, he just curled up against the wall. I turned to my wife. She was trembling, but looked me straight in the eyes. She didn't hide. "Where's Lisa?" I asked. She looked away. "With my brother. With Dan." I couldn't believe my ears. "You left our daughter with that drunk." I thought it would be better. I stepped closer, feeling the fury boiling inside me. "Better for who, Maggie? For you? So our daughter wouldn't get in the way while you fucked this piece of shit?" She sobbed. I glanced at the lover. He was gone. The bedroom window was wide open. Shit. But right now, I didn't care. Where does Dan live now? In a trailer outside town, near the old gas station. I was already heading for the door when she grabbed my sleeve. "Michael, please, don't hurt him." I yanked my arm free. "If anything happened to Lisa, you'll be the first to pay for it." I walked out without bothering to shut the door. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Thoughts churned in my head like the storm I had just left behind. Dan, that useless drunk, the man my wife had trusted with the most precious thing in my life. If something happened to Lisa, I would destroy them both. The gas station Maggie mentioned looked just as pathetic as Dan himself. A couple of rusted-out cars, trash everywhere, the stench of booze thick even from outside. I hit the brakes hard, got out, and walked straight to the trailer. The door was ajar. "Lisa," I barked. There was a rustling inside, and a few seconds later, she appeared in the doorway. I swollen from crying, wearing a filthy hoodie, but alive. "Dad?" I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Pack your things. We're leaving." She walked out without looking back. Behind her, I heard movement. Dan, disheveled, reeking of alcohol, a bottle still clutched in his hand. "Hey, brother-in-law, what the fuck do you think you're doing?" I stepped up to him, close enough for him to smell the violence radiating off me. "If you ever come near Lisa again, I will rip your fucking tongue out. You got that?" He muttered something incoherent, but I was already done listening. Lisa and I got in the car and sped away. A few miles down the road, I heard a quiet sniffle. "Lisa." I glanced at her, but she stared out the window as if afraid to speak. "Dad." I didn't want to say anything, but he did it too. Blood pounded in my ears. "Who?" She bit her lip. "Mom's lover. That bastard. He was always looking at me, touching me when she wasn't around." I tried to tell her, but she wouldn't listen. I squeezed the steering wheel so hard I thought the plastic would crack. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because," her voice trembled. "Because I couldn't live with her anymore. Even staying with a drunk uncle was better." I didn't answer. I just slammed my foot on the gas. We weren't going home. That place was rotten from the walls to the people inside. I had a cabin. Small, but solid. A place where we could breathe again. When I cut the engine and opened the door, Lisa was still sitting there, staring into the dark. Dad? Yeah? You're going to find him, aren't you? I looked at her. Yeah, baby girl. And he's going to wish he was never born. The night was quiet. Lisa had fallen asleep, wrapped in a warm blanket, while I sat at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in my hand. I didn't drink much. I needed my head clear. Tomorrow, there was work to do. The cabin was old, but strong. I had built it myself, with my own hands. It had once been my sanctuary. Now, peace was the last thing I could expect. Then I heard footsteps. Too late. The door exploded open with a deafening crash. Before I could turn, something heavy slammed into the back of my skull. Darkness erupted before my eyes as I dropped to my knees, feeling warm blood trickle down my neck. A familiar voice, thick with mockery, drifted over me. Well, fisherman, how does it feel to be the catch this time? I tried to rise, but rough hands grabbed me, dragging me out into the night. The moon cast its pale light over a group of men 6, maybe 8. Their faces twisted in cruel smirks, their confidence radiating in the dim glow. A couple of them gripped baseball bats, one held a knife, but all of them looked eager for blood. And at the front of the pack him. You really laid into me last time, asshole. His face was still bruised, his lips split and swollen. You think I just let that slide? I remained silent. Pain didn't scare me. I had been beaten before. But this wasn't just a fight. This was revenge. Cowardly, dirty revenge by a pack of jackhawls who had been promised beer and cash for roughing up a lone man. Maggie's lover, Derek, sneered. You know who told me about this little cabin of yours? He leaned in closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. Your darling wife. Sweet, isn't she? Told me you always come here when things go south. She was really comforting after you beat the hell out of me. A fist drove into my gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I doubled over, coughing, trying to pull in breath. I even thought about letting it go, Derek continued, his voice almost casual. But then I realized that wouldn't be right. You need to know your place. You've already been shown that you're nothing, haven't you? He gave a slight nod, and a boot crashed into my ribs. Then another. Then a fist. I hit the ground hard, but they yanked me up just to strike me down again. The taste of blood filled my mouth. They were coordinated, practiced in their cruelty. Derek stood off to the side, watching, enjoying the way his thugs turned me into a pile of bruises and shattered bones. That's right, fisherman. Just like that. He laughed, his voice thick with amusement. Feel that? Feels good to be nothing, doesn't it? I spat a mouthful of blood at his feet, staining his shoe. He paused, then smirked and crouched down beside me. Killing you would be too easy, but making you live with this, now that's something I can enjoy. He grinned wider, eyes alight with a new idea. Actually, I just thought of something even better. I breathed heavily, assessing my chances. They weren't in my favor, but this wasn't over. I saw it in his eyes. He didn't think I had anything left in me. He was wrong. I spat blood onto the cold ground, feeling my body go numb from the relentless beating. My ribs burned with every breath, but worse than the pain was the way Derek savored the moment. All right, boys, he said, wiping his bloody lip. Let's send our fisherman back to where he belongs. They grabbed my arms, dragging me toward the pier. A small motorboat bobbed on the water, its hull rusted and worn, but the engine looked solid. Several gas canisters lay on the floor of the boat. You love the sea, don't you, Michael? Derek taunted, grinning. Well, it's time for you to go back. I struggled, but one of his goons drove a fist into my stomach. I gasped, doubling over as they roughly tied my wrists with rope and threw me into the boat like a sack of trash. Then they tied me to the boat itself. Derek crouched beside me, patting my cheek like a father comforting a child. One more thing, fisherman, his voice took on a mocking softness. You're a decent father, but a terrible husband. Your wife? She needed a little excitement in her life. And your daughter? I froze. What about my daughter? He smirked. Well, you won't be able to protect her now. I'll think of something fun to do with her. Maybe she'll come in handy for entertainment. A cold, blinding rage swallowed me whole. I jerked against the ropes, but Derek shoved me back down, pressing into my broken ribs. Relax, Michael. Just accept your fate. He grabbed one of the gas canisters, unscrewed the cap, and began pouring fuel all over the deck. We're not savages, one of his men chuckled. Maybe the canisters will explode quickly, so we won't have to suffer too long. Oh, absolutely, Derek stood, brushing his hands off. You're in for one hell of a ride. I clenched my teeth, burning his smirk into my memory. If I get out of this. Oh, don't worry, you won't, Derek interrupted, firing up the engine. The boat rumbled to life, the water churning around us. Derek reversed the throttle, pulling the boat further from the dock, then yanked the starter cord again, shifting it into full gear forward. And then he tossed a lit lighter into the boat. Flames erupted, dancing across the gas-soaked wood. "Bon voyage, fisherman," Derek called out, waving mockingly as the boat sped toward the open sea. The flames spread quickly, licking at the sides, hungrily devouring everything in their path. Heat blasted against my skin, the thick stench of burning fuel choking the air. But fear had no place in my mind. There was only one thought: they made a mistake. The fire consumed everything. Gasoline-soaked wood ignited instantly, flames crawling up the boat's frame like a living thing. Smoke stung my eyes, my lungs burned, but I forced myself to focus. The ropes began to smolder, searing into my wrists. The boat surged forward, carrying me toward an inevitable explosion. I yanked against my restraints, feeling the fibers cut into my skin. Pain. More pain. A final, desperate pull. One hand came free. Then the other. My sleeve caught fire. The searing heat licked at my shoulder, skin screaming in agony. I ripped off my jacket, tossing it into the flames, but time was running out. The canisters. They were swollen with heat, bulging, seconds away from turning the boat into a fireball. 1 second. Maybe 2. I jumped. The ocean hit me like a wall of ice, shocking my system. I forced myself deeper, kicking hard, pushing as far from the inferno as I could. And then it happened. A blast shook the water, a deafening roar echoing through the night. The shock wave threw me downward, spinning me like a rag doll. My ears rang. I forced myself to swim up. My lungs screamed for air. Just a little more. I broke the surface, gasping. Behind me, the sea was ablaze. Burning wreckage rained down, flames danced on the waves. Smoke curled into the night sky like a funeral pyre. I spat out salt water, turned toward the shore. They were still there, laughing, congratulating themselves. Derek stood at the center, grinning, soaking in the moment. He thought I was dead. He was wrong, and it would be the last mistake he ever made. The water was ice cold, but I didn't feel it. Only rage. It drove me forward, my arms cutting through the waves, my legs propelling me toward the shore. Pain meant nothing. The burns, the gashes, the bruises, none of it mattered. I was alive, and they didn't know it. Let them celebrate. Let them think it's over. They had no idea who they had just pissed off. For years, I buried the truth about myself. I let myself forget. I pretended I could live a normal life. A fisherman. A husband. A father. A peaceful man. But I was never that. Once, I had another name. I had been a Marine. But not just any Marine. I was part of Death Squad. That's what they called us. We weren't just soldiers. We were the solution. They sent us where negotiations failed, where enemies were too dangerous, where dirty work needed to be done. No witnesses, no mercy. We weren't trained to give second chances. We left nothing but bodies. I thought I had buried that part of me. But these bastards just reminded me who I really am. And now, they all die. One by one. I dragged myself onto the shore, breathing heavily. Water streamed off me in freezing rivulets, but I didn't care. Adrenaline surged through my veins, dulling the pain, numbing the exhaustion. I moved quickly, despite the burns and cuts, heading toward the cabin. But when I got there, they were already gone. The door was wide open. Inside, everything was overturned, as if they hadn't even bothered to rush. They hadn't expected me back. They thought I was already feeding the fish. But the worst part, Lisa was gone. I stood in the doorway, clenching my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "Where's my daughter?" I stepped inside, scanning the room. The furniture was flipped over, the couch slashed open, papers and trash littered the floor. And then I saw it. A matchbox. I bent down and picked it up. Damp, stained with dirt, but the name on it was still clear. Bloodhound Club. I knew that place. A filthy, degenerate pit crawling with scum fight club, drugs, dirty money. The kind of place where people with nothing to lose gathered. Which meant they were there. There was no time to arm myself. Every second, they were taking my daughter further away. I needed to catch up to them. And once I got there, I'd figure something out. I entered the club without hesitation. The low hum of voices, the stench of cheap alcohol, sweat, and something else, maybe blood, at me in the face. The place was soaked in filth, both literally and figuratively. Dim lights, broken furniture, a crowd of degenerates who didn't give a damn about loss. I walked through the room and sat at the bar. The noise died down slightly. A few heavy-set thugs were already eyeing me. Not surprising. I looked like I had just crawled out of a grave, me clothes burned, torn, stained with blood. But I didn't care. The bartender, a fat man with tattooed arms and a nose like a boiled potato, glanced at me lazily. "Whiskey," I said without looking at him. "It's been a rough day." He snorted, but poured the drink. I picked up the glass, took a slow sip, and scanned the room. They were here? Somewhere. So was she. And if not, someone would talk. I set the glass back on the counter and, without turning my head, spoke loudly. "Where's Derek?" The ear shifted. The low murmur of conversation faltered, as if someone had suddenly turned down the volume. The bartender stopped wiping his glass and squinted at me. "Listen, buddy, we don't ask questions like that here." His eyes flickered toward a table in the back. I didn't move. "I'll ask again. Where is he?" The bartender swallowed, but tried to play it cool. Barely perceptibly, he nodded toward the bouncer at the entrance. The bouncer hesitated, then glanced toward a table where a group of muscle-bound thugs sat. One of them, clearly the leader, had scarred knuckles and the kind of face that had been in too many fights. The bouncer knew I was trouble, and with a look, he told them to take care of it. The goons stood up slowly, grinning like predators. They moved toward me, surrounding me from three sides. "You lost, buddy," one of them sneered, cracking his knuckles. That's when I noticed him. The old man. He sat nearby, nursing his drink, silent but watchful. His posture, his eyes. Military, without a doubt. A man who had seen hell and walked out breathing. And now, as he looked at me, he went pale. I saw his gaze drop to my wrist. The tattoo. Death Squad. His face tightened, as if he had just seen a ghost from his past. He got up slowly, approached me, and gave a small nod, almost like a salute. "Thank you for your service," he muttered under his breath, so only I could hear. Then he shot a fearful glance at the goons, turned on his heel, and walked out of the building as fast as he could. And I turned back to the men who were so sure they were about to beat me down. They had no idea what they had just walked into. The first idiot barely had time to reach for me before I smashed my whiskey glass into his face. The glass shattered. Shards embedded themselves deep into his eye socket. "Time to wash up, you filthy fuck," I muttered, shoving him aside. He screamed, clutching his face, blood pouring through his fingers. I was already moving. The second thug swung at me, but I sidestepped, using his own momentum to send him crashing into the bar. His jaw met the polished wood with a sickening crunch. "Careful, man. The bartender doesn't like it when people break his furniture," I smirked. The third one reached for a knife. Classic. I let him have 1 second to enjoy his confidence before I snapped his nose with the edge of my palm. He roared, clutching his ruined face. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it violently in the opposite direction. A dull crack. "Come on, man. Knives aren't your thing. Seriously, quit while you're ahead," I advised as he howled in agony. The fourth one grabbed me in a bear hug. He was the biggest. But as they say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. I let him think he had me. Just for a second. Then I slammed my forehead into his face. The sound was like a melon bursting open. He collapsed to his knees, twitching. His nose was no longer a nose. "Hope you weren't planning on a modeling career, buddy," I chuckled, pulling a knife from his belt. Something whistled behind me. I ducked. A baseball bat sailed over my head, smashing into the mirror behind the bar. "Oh, that was pathetic," I laughed, driving my foot into his crotch. He let out a strangled wheeze, doubling over. I helped him meet my knee. Boom. He crumpled to the floor like a sack of rotten vegetables. The room fell silent. Blood dripped down my face, mine or theirs. I didn't know or care. Some men groaned, trying to crawl away. Others lay completely still. But the ones who had attacked me that night, they weren't here. I wiped my face, sighed, and sat back down. I poured myself another glass of whiskey and drank it in one go. Then I set the empty glass on the bar. "All right, scumbags. Now tell me, where's Derek?" The bartender trembled, his sweaty face turning a sickly shade of pale. I don't know, man," he stammered, backing up until he hit the bar. "I swear, I have no idea where Derek is." I sighed. Wrong answer. And I drove my knife through his hand, pinning it to the counter. The bartender howled, his body jerking violently as he tried to yank his hand free, but the blade was buried deep, wedged firmly into the old wooden counter. Blood streamed down his fingers. "Ag, you son of a bitch," he screamed, doubling over in pain. I calmly reached for the whiskey bottle, took a slow sip, and looked at him. "Now maybe you'll remember?" The bartender nodded so frantically his head looked ready to detach from his shoulders. Oh, there's this one bastard. He rasped. Goes by Roy. That scumbag is Derek's right-hand man. They're always together if Derek's anywhere nearby. This guy definitely knows where. I nodded. Where is he? The bartender twitched, as if wanting to wipe the sweat off his forehead, but his free hand was still nailed to the counter. He's at a place on 17th Street, number 54. He's got a hooker there. Roy loves to hole up in that dump. You'll find him easy. I pulled the knife from his hand, and he screamed, clutching the gushing wound. Thanks for your cooperation, I smirked. Then I grabbed the bottle, tightened my grip on the knife, and headed for the exit. Now I had my next target. I drove towards 17th Street, 54, without a concrete plan. I didn't need one. Roy was already a dead man, I just didn't know it yet. The house was a rundown dump, paint peeling, windows covered by thick curtains, faint light glowing inside. I walked up to the door and knocked. Not hard, just enough to let them know they had a choice. Open up, or I break it down. A few seconds later, footsteps approached, followed by a sharp female voice. Who's there? I smirked. Sanitation. Time to clean up the filth. The door cracked open on its chain, and through the gap, a young woman peered out caked in makeup like a circus act, wearing a sheer robe that covered absolutely nothing. What kind of sanitation? I shoved the door so hard the chain snapped, sending her flying backward into the wall. She screamed. The kind that works with meat. A voice from deeper inside the room groaned in irritation. Jesus, Melissa, can't you check who I stepped in? Roy. Sprawled out on the bed in nothing but boxers, one hand clutching a bottle, the other groping the ass of the woman now crumpled on the floor. His bloodshot eyes locked onto me. His gaze flicked over my burned, cut-up hands. My bloodstained face. Who the fuck are you? I didn't answer. I just smashed my fist into his face. He didn't even have time to yell. He went down hard, gasping for air. The real question is, who the fuck are you, Roy? I said, shutting the door behind me. The girl scrambled to her feet, screaming, but I flicked the knife toward the exit. Get out. You've got the night off. She bolted faster than I expected. I turned back to Roy. He was trying to get up, but I planted my boot on his chest, pinning him to the floor. All right, Roy. You're gonna help me out. Go fuck yourself. He spat, blood dribbling from his lips. I sighed and grabbed him by the hair, yanking him uponly to slam his skull into the edge of the table. A dull, sickening crunch. Wrong answer, I muttered, smashing his face down again. Let's try this again. Where's Derek? I don't know. I glanced around the room, then spotted something in the corner. An iron. Old, Soviet era, built like a brick. Heavy as hell. I grinned. Well, Roy, looks like we're gonna have to dance. I plugged in the iron. Roy let out a choked whimper, his body jerking involuntarily. I get the feeling your memory's about to improve. A minute later, the iron was sizzling hot. I sat down beside him, watching him the way a doctor might study a patient before surgery. I could start with your hand, I mused. But we both know that's not what really matters to you. I grabbed the waistband of his boxers. Don't fucking do this. He screeched. I pressed the searing metal against his shoulder. The room filled with the nauseating stench of burning flesh. Roy let out a howl, thrashing like a fish yanked out of water. Where's Derek? Fuck. Okay. He's at the port. I pulled the iron away. Go on. He gasped, his skin still smoldering, but he kept talking. He's got a crab processing business, but it's just a front. He's running contraband. Where exactly? The old port building. Concrete. Gray. Like a fucking bunker. He spends most of his time there. And the girl? Roy swallowed hard. She's probably there. If he took her, she's in the basement. I stood up, tucking the knife away. Then my eyes landed on his closet. Leather jacket. Black pants. Expensive boots. Perfect fit. Thanks, Roy. You were useful. Really? He gasped, hope flickering in his bloody, swollen eyes. No. I buried the knife in his throat and twisted. Blood gushed out in a thick, violent spray. Roy let out a wet, gurgling rasp, then collapsed into silence. I pulled on his jacket, adjusted the fit, then looked at myself in the mirror. Now I looked like just another piece of shit. Exactly what I needed. I tightened the knife at my belt and walked out. Now I knew where to go. I moved toward the port at an unhurried but deliberate pace. Now, I didn't look like a battered fisherman. Now, I looked like one of them. The perfect disguise. The port greeted me with the thick, suffocating stench of salt, oil, and rotting fish. Massive shipping containers towered over the docks like concrete tombstones. Warehouses with peeling paint stretched along the waterfront, the distant roar of engines cutting through the air. Derek had picked his hideout well. Everything here was rotten: the people, the business, the very air itself. I stopped behind a stack of crates, scanning the area. At least 15 men. Some were smoking, leaning against trucks. Others were unloading crates labeled crab meat, but I knew damn well they weren't just moving seafood. Then I spotted some familiar faces. Two of the bastards who beat me down on the beach. One with his arm wrapped in a sling. The other with a half-swollen face. Laughing. Proud of their work. Beyond the main warehouse, I saw a gray concrete fortress. If Lisa was here, she was inside that building. I narrowed my eyes. A sniper on the roof. Not a professional, but the rifle was real. 2 guards at the entrance, holding shotguns. And inside? More. I took a slow, deep breath. The port was crawling with scum. Perfect. This was going to be fun. I moved slowly along the containers, absorbing every sound, every movement. Workers hauled crates, the air thick with the stench of rotting fish, machine oil, and cheap cigarettes. Some men chatted, others laughed, and a pair of thugs near the warehouse casually discussed how much heroin they could smuggle inside a crab shipment before it would get flagged. And then my eyes landed on exactly what I needed. Sitting atop a nearby crate was a massive machete. Someone had been using it moments ago, probably to hack through something, but now it lay there, abandoned. The blade was thick, heavy, and streaked with dried blood. I picked it up, ran a finger along the steel. Oh yeah, this was exactly what the doctor ordered. Now we could begin. I made my way toward the security room. From behind the door came laughter, gruff voices, the sharp slap of cards hitting a table. I pushed it open and stepped inside. 4 men. One with a pistol on his belt, 2 unarmed but built like refrigerators, and the last one looked like his main job was eating and napping. They glanced at me, surprised, but not alarmed. "Who the fuck are you?" asked the one dealing the cards. I took my time locking the door behind me. Click. The 4 men exchanged looks. Then they laughed. "Oh shit." He locked the door. The fat one chuckled. "What next, buddy? You gonna make us stand in line?" "Listen, if you're here looking for a job, this ain't a goddamn interview," said another, throwing his cards onto the table. "Unless you're good at sucking off craps." I looked at him, then slowly lifted the machete. "I'm not here for a job. I'm here to take out the trash." The laughter died. The guy with the pistol reached for his gun. I stepped forward and took his hand off at the wrist. The severed limb hit the floor with a wet slap, his weapon still clutched in lifeless fingers. He let out a scream, clutching the bloody stump. Fuck. My hand." "Shut up." I drove the machete into his throat. A wet gurgle. A spray of crimson. He hit the ground, already gone. The other 3 scrambled to their feet, chairs clattering over, faces twisted in horror. "You psycho fuck," roared one of the big guys as he charged. I sidestepped his lunge and took his leg off at the knee. He hit the ground like a felled tree, howling so loud the entire port probably heard him. "Stay down, asshole. You're not going anywhere." The fat one grabbed a chair, swinging it at me. I brought the machete down hard, burying it into his shoulder. The blade sank deep, and he shrieked, flailing as blood gushed from the wound. I pressed my boot into his gut and yanked the machete free. "What the fuck are you doing?" he screeched, clutching at his wound. "Helping you lose weight, asshole." The last one, the youngest, made a run for the door, but it was still locked. I caught him by the throat, shoved him against the wall, and pressed the machete's edge against his crotch. "Tell me, tough guy," I said calmly, "do you enjoy working for Derek?" He turned pale as a ghost. Bro, I just work here." I pressed the blade a little harder. "I'll tell you everything." I released him, and he slumped against the wall, gasping, eyes wild with terror. "Where's Derek?" "I in the old port building, next to the warehouse. He's there almost all the time. That's where all the cash and shipments are." "And the girl?" "P probably there. If he took her, she's locked up in the basement." I nodded. "Thanks for your cooperation." He barely had time to open his mouth before I slashed the machete across his throat. Blood sprayed the walls. He clutched at his neck, eyes bulging, making wet, desperate choking noises before slumping to the floor. I glanced around. The room had turned into a slaughterhouse. The stench of blood, fear, and shit filled the air. Someone had lost control of their bowels. I wiped the machete on one of the corpses, slung it over my shoulder, and looked at the door. Now I knew where Derek was. Everything was falling into place. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. A metal locker in the corner, dusty, forgotten, and seemingly unimportant. I narrowed my eyes and kicked it. The door rattled and swung open slightly. What I saw inside made me laugh. Well, I'll be damned. A fucking machine gun. Big. Heavy. Belt-fed. Looked like it could gut a rhino. Next to Edith's sniper rifle. You bastards really stocked up for Christmas, huh? I smirked. Appreciate the gift. I grabbed the rifle, checked the chamber. Fully loaded. First things first. Take out the sniper. I opened the window and looked up at the warehouse rooftop. The idiot up there was picking at his teeth, completely unaware that in less than a second, his head would turn into a fucking watermelon. I took aim. Smile, motherfucker. Bang. His head exploded, his body tumbling backward. The rifle clattered down the roof. Now for the fun part. I slung the machete over my back, picked up the machine gun, and walked straight toward the dockyard thugs. At first, they didn't understand what was happening. Then, I pulled the trigger. Hell broke loose. The machine gun roared, spitting lead with such force that trucks started shaking. The first to drop? The two bastards who had beaten me on the beach. They didn't even have time to process what was happening before they were ripped apart. Bullets tore through bodies, smashed into crates, ripped open trucks. Holy fuck, what is this? Kill him. It's Michael. Too late, assholes. Some ran for cover. Big mistake. I didn't stop, marching forward through the blood and screams. A few tried hiding behind vehicles, but the machine gun had no mercy. I tore open truck doors, shredded through crates, watched as men collapsed, clutching at their spilling guts. Some ran toward the building. Perfect. I just moved in closer. Anyone outside was already dead. And those inside? They were trapped. The machine gun still smoked in my hands, but it was no longer needed. The ground around me was littered with bodies, blood still trickling from them, mixing with the thick clouds of gunpowder smoke. The few survivors had already locked themselves inside the concrete building, thinking they had found salvation. Naive bastards. I slowly lowered the machine gun onto the ground, savoring the sound of metal clanging against concrete. After all this lead-slinging chaos, it was time for something more intimate. I rolled my shoulders like a man about to start a workout and leisurely pulled the machete from my back. The steel, still caked with dried blood, gleamed under the dim floodlights. This wasn't a weapon. This was a statement. I stepped up to the massive doors leading into the building and pushed them open. The creaking hinges echoed down the corridor, like a funeral march for every last soul inside. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I slowly shut the doors and locked them. No one was getting out. No one. It was dark inside. Heavy breathing filled the air. Someone was whispering prayers, another shuffled, trying to hide behind crates. Their fear was almost tangible. I ran my blade along the wall, a sharp, piercing screech scraping against their already frayed nerves. All right, scumbags, let's play hide and seek, I said, stepping forward. Only this time. I'm not the one hiding. Silence held for exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos. I disappeared into the shadows, moving between crates, gliding along the concrete walls. They couldn't tell where I was. Each of them was terrified of being next. The first didn't even have time to scream. My machete sliced his throat open. Blood sprayed onto the floor, his body convulsing in agony before collapsing. From somewhere to my right, a voice shrieked in panic. He's here. Where? I was already behind another fool. The machete sank into his lower back and ripped through his stomach, spilling his guts onto the floor with a wet, sickening splatter. His eyes went wide. He gurgled, trembling hands frantically trying to shove his intestines back inside. He collapsed, face first, into his own mess. What the fuck? He's everywhere at once. They scattered around the warehouse, lost, clueless. Someone fired wildly into the air, only making things worse. I emerged from the dark, swung my machete down, and split a man's shoulder open. His weapon clattered to the ground. The blade continued its path, slicing into his neck, cutting straight through. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, hanging by a strip of flesh. He dropped without a sound. No. No. Please, no. Screams of despair echoed through the warehouse, but there was no way out. I ducked under a support beam, leaped onto a crate, and kicked a man off. The snap of his breaking bones told me he wouldn't be getting back up. Another ran. I hurled my machete. The blade buried itself deep in his back. He stumbled forward a few more steps before collapsing, clawing at the floor. I walked up, yanked the machete free, then finished him off with a clean stroke to the base of the skull. The floor was already a river of blood. Guts, severed limbs, dismembered body. This warehouse had turned into a slaughterhouse. The last thug fell to his knees, dropped his weapon, and started praying. Please, please don't. I leaned down, staring straight into his eyes. God's busy, but I'll deliver your message. The machete rose and fell. The screams stopped. Now, only Derek remained. Him and the last few bastards who had tortured me that night. I walked down the corridor, leaving bloody footprints behind me, like death itself had decided to stroll through this cursed building. The air was thick with the stench of blood, burned flesh, and fear. Those who had tried to hide were gone. All that remained were the fools who believed they were untouchable. They were wrong. I knew exactly where to find Derek. His office was deep inside the building behind thick doors, behind men who thought they were safe. I kicked the door open. The room was dimly lit. Walls lined with maps, weapons, stacks of cash. Behind a massive oak desk, Derek sat. The same filthy bastards who had beaten me that night stood by the walls, lounging on sofas, thinking they were untouchable. The moment I entered, their faces turned pale. No fucking way, one of them muttered, gripping his pistol. You were supposed to be dead, you son of a bitch. Another growled, as if trying to convince himself. Derek slowly stood. I saw if his hands were shaking. He forced that smug smirk onto his face, but his eyes betrayed him. Panic. You're alive, he said slowly, forcing his voice to stay calm. But you don't understand what you're doing, Michael. You don't even know who you're messing with. I dragged the machete across the desk, leaving a deep scratch in the wood. Then I lifted it, meeting Derek's gaze. No, you don't understand. I'm not the one who picked this fight. You and your mutts did. One of them snapped. Fuck you. He roared, lunging with a knife. I caught him by the throat, spun him around, and shoved his own blade into his mouth and drove the handle through the back of his skull. Squish. The blade burst out the other side of his neck. His body twitched violently before slumping forward. I shoved him aside, letting him fall face first into the pile of cash. Oh look, he's rich now. I smirked. Shame he won't get to spend it. The rest of them backed away, pressing against the wall. Fucking shoot him, dumbass. Someone screamed. One of them pulled a pistol. I split his hand in half. Ahad. My hand. I kicked him in the chest, sending him sprawling. Then stomped his face in. Another grabbed a rifle, but I hacked through his thigh. He collapsed, wailing like a dying dog. Stay down, asshole. One more grabbed a bottle, swinging it at me. I caught his wrist, took off his hand, then shoved the broken glass into his eye. He shrieked, fell to his knees. I ended it with a clean machete strike to the base of his skull. Two left. They dropped their weapons, begging. Please, man, we were just following orders. I knelt beside one of them. You beat me that night? He nodded, trembling. Yeah, but... I drove the machete into his crotch and twisted. He arched back, gurgling, spitting blood. That's for Lisa. The last one started praying. I shrugged. Go ahead. Maybe your God will listen. I grabbed him by the hair and slammed his face into the oak desk. Crack. Guess not. I let his body drop. Now, only Derek remained. He stood behind his desk, clutching a pistol, but he couldn't even lift it. He stared at me, and for the first time in his life, he understood. This was the end. I stepped toward the desk, leaving behind sticky footprints of blood, and slowly placed the machete on its surface, as if giving Derek a moment to truly understand was completely, utterly alone now. Where's Lisa? My voice was hollow, cold like a blade that had already carved its way through dozens of throats. Derek shook violently, his fingers twitching around his pistol, but I saw the truth. He couldn't even pull the trigger. All that bravado, all that street-tough arrogance gone. All that remained in his eyes was pure, animal terror. Michael, now listen, let's not do anything hasty. Where is she? He flinched, nodding frantically like a fool, then clawed at his pocket before yanking out a set of keys. In the basement. Through that door, down the stairs. She's fine, I swear. Not a single hair on her head was harmed. Man, I swear to God, she's perfectly safe. He threw the keys at me, like a desperate offering, hoping that would be enough to buy his life. I caught them without even looking. Good boy, I said, tucking them into my pocket. But you don't actually think I'm letting you go, do you? Derek froze. His lips trembled, cold sweat beading on his forehead. Wait. P, please. His voice cracked into a high, panicked whimper. I picked up the machete. Not to kill him right away. No, I had something special planned for him. I grabbed him by the collar and hurled him into the center of the room, watching him flail and scream, clutching at nothing like a drowning man. I sighed, set the machete down, and leaned in close. Do you know what a Colombian necktie is, Derek? He froze. But judging by the wet stains spreading across his pants, he had already figured it out. And no. Michael, please. I drew my knife. And in one swift motion, I slit his throat. Not deep. Not all the way. Just enough to open his windpipe. Enough so he could still breathe. Derek gurgled, choking on his own blood. That's when I shoved 2 fingers into his mouth. Don't move, Derek. He convulsed violently, but it was too late. I gripped his tongue and pulled it forward, stretching it past the gaping wound in his throat. That's it, don't fight it. His eyes bulged, his body thrashing in agony, but I kept pulling until the tongue slipped neatly through the slit in his throat, hanging loose like a grotesque, bloody tie. There we go. Now you really look like a diplomat, asshole. He clawed at his own neck, as if he could fix it, but a few seconds later, his body convulsed one last time and collapsed into a pool of his own blood. I wiped my hands clean, picked up the machete, and headed for the basement. Lisa was waiting for me. She clung to my hand, trembling. But she didn't cry. She knew she was safe now. I had pulled her out of that hellhole. Now, there was only one last thing left to do. I looked toward the car and said, simply, wait. She understood. She nodded. I turned away and made my final walk back to where this all started. Back home. When I entered, Maggie was sitting on the couch, nervously wringing the hem of her robe. There was hope in her eyes. Michael, you found her? I nodded. I found her. She stood up, ready to throw herself into some dramatic, tearful reunion. I didn't give her the chance. Pack your things. What? You don't live here anymore. She went pale. Michael. But what about the house? What about me? The house. I scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. You really want to talk about the house? You betrayed me. You betrayed Lisa. And now that your little boy toy is worm food, there's no one left to take care of you. So, you have 2 choices. Walk out on your own, or I throw you through the fucking door. She snapped. You can't do this. This house is mine. I'm not leaving. I sighed, reached into my pocket, and flicked open a lighter. The small flame danced between us as I met her gaze. By the way, I said lazily, since we're talking, there's something that's always bothered me about you. She hesitated, still refusing to believe I was actually kicking her out. You use way too much hairspray. Her face twisted in confusion. I stepped forward fast and pressed the flame to her hair. It ignited instantly, like dry grass soaked in gasoline. She screamed, clawing at her head, slapping at the flames, but they only roared higher. Michael, you psychotic fuck. Maybe. I smirked. But you're definitely the brightest star tonight. She shrieked, bolting outside, desperately looking for anything to put herself out until she saw it. The massive, filthy puddle. With a final, desperate scream, she leapt and dove in head first. I shook my head, watching her crawl out, drenched, coughing up mud, sputtering curses at me. There, right where you belong. I turned and walked back to the car. Lisa was waiting, clutching her backpack. Are you ready? She looked at me, then past meet the smoking house, at the soaking, dirt-covered wreck of a woman that used to be her mother. She didn't hesitate. Yeah, we drove to the port. Derek had left behind a damn good yacht. White, sleek, fully fueled, fully stocked. I untied the ropes, stepped onto the captain's bridge, and started the engine. Lisa stood beside me, staring at the darkening horizon. What now? I looked at her determined, grown-up face. Then at the open water ahead. Now, Lisa. I smiled. Now we just sail away. To a new life. The yacht turned, picking up speed, leaving behind all the filth of the past.